Yes, Mom?
Henry, please, no!
If you had two kids dangling off the edge of a cliff, one grinning like a sociopathic Cheshire cat and the other screaming for dear life, which one would you save? Sure, this isn't your average parenting scenario, unless you're Susan in The Good Son, where things get real complicated, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll circle back to that lovely dilemma later. For now, let's talk about what makes The Good Son a deeply unsettling psychological horror that's wrapped in the deceptive package of childhood innocence.
Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
This isn't a film that hides its darkness in the basement or relies on a masked killer lurking in the bushes. No, The Good Son plants its horror right at the dinner table, nestled snugly between the mashed potatoes and the comforting glow of family photos. So what makes this movie so uniquely disturbing? It's not the gore, but the sheer coldness of a child's smile as he contemplates murder, and that's far scarier than any man with a chainsaw. Let's dive straight into the heart of it. Macaulay Culkin's Henry Evans isn't your typical troubled kid. He's not even your typical evil kid. He's more like the Hannibal Lecter of elementary school, except without the charm or the liver-eating tendencies, yet.
It rubs the lotion on its skin. It does this whenever it's told.
Henry's real weapon isn't a knife or a gun. It's his angelic face and that deceptively sweet smile, both of which he uses to manipulate everyone around him. Early in the film, Henry befriends his cousin Mark, played by Elijah Wood, who's already dealing with enough trauma to fill a therapist's calendar for a year. But Henry isn't interested in Mark's well-being. He's interested in testing how far Mark can be pushed. In one scene, Henry dangles the possibility of causing harm like it's a fun game, asking Mark,
If I let you go, you think you could fly?
It's not just a test of bravery, it's a test of morality, a twisted initiation into Henry's version of childhood. And here's the punchline. Henry doesn't care whether Mark falls or not. He's simply curious. Curious in the same way a cat is curious about a mouse's last twitch. This is Henry's psychological playbook. Establish dominance through coercion and gaslight his victims until reality blurs. You can almost imagine him growing up to be a hedge fund manager or a politician.
I'm not guilty. Does that include the time I stole a comic book when I was 5 years old?
Now let's talk about one of the most disturbingly brilliant scenes in the movie. The infamous highway dummy drop. Picture this. A snowy afternoon, a picturesque setting that seems more suited for a Hallmark special. Then, bam! Henry drops a mannequin onto a crowded highway. Causing a chain reaction of cars swerving, crashing, and skidding. The ensuing chaos is gruesome and unexpected, with the tranquility of the snow acting as a stark contrast to the carnage below. He's beaming with a sense of satisfaction that's chillingly casual. For him, this isn't an act of anger or revenge. It's more like a science experiment. You can almost hear him thinking, I wonder how many cars will crash this time. And that's the true horror here. It's not just that he did it, it's that he did it with all the emotional investment of picking out breakfast cereal.
Silly rabbit, tricks are for kids!
This moment is crucial because it's the point where the audience realizes there's no good in this good son. If the film hadn't already hinted that Henry's hobbies lean more toward future serial killer than junior soccer league, this scene seals the deal. It's a stark depiction of what psychologists call callous unemotional traits. Henry isn't just misbehaving, he's testing the limits of human pain, all while maintaining the grin of a kid who's just won at Monopoly. Here's a disturbing theory for you. Henry isn't just a kid who went off the rails, he's a cinematic representation of childhood psychopathy. While most movies prefer their villains to have a tragic backstory or a moment of redemption, The Good Son keeps Henry's malevolence pure and simple. He's evil because he enjoys it. It's as if the writers thought, Why give him a reason when he can be terrifying without one? Psychopathy is generally considered an adult trait, but some forensic psychologists argue that its roots can manifest as early as childhood. Henry's behavior fits this theory disturbingly well. He's manipulative, devoid of empathy, and eerily charming when he wants to be.
Mark! No!
Mom! Mom, I love you!
Stop it!
It's like the filmmakers took the concept of a bad seed and dialed it up to 11. There's no traumatic backstory here. No abusive parents, no bullying, no head trauma. It's a bold move, but it makes the film's horror more profound.
Oh my God.
It suggests that some people, or children in this case, are simply born with a glitch in the empathy department, a concept that's both terrifying and deeply uncomfortable.
I was only trying to scare him.
It forces us to consider the possibility that evil isn't always created. Sometimes it's simply born. And then there's Susan, the loving but tragically oblivious mother. Susan's greatest flaw isn't that she's blind to Henry's behavior, it's that she chooses to be.
You really thought I was gonna jump, huh? I guess you don't know me very well, Mom.
This phenomenon, known as willful blindness, is a common psychological defense mechanism where people ignore uncomfortable truths to maintain a sense of normalcy. In Susan's case, it's a fatal flaw that makes her complicit in the horror that unfolds. Mark, of course, tries to warn her, several times in fact. He tells Susan about Henry's disturbing actions, like when Henry attempts to drown his sister Connie by pushing her onto thin ice. But Susan dismisses these warnings, preferring to believe that Mark's grief over his mother's death is clouding his judgment.
You better stop telling lies about me, because no one's gonna believe you.
Sooner or later, they're gonna find out about you.
Who's they? My dad? My mom?
I told your mom.
Why would she believe you? She's my mom, not yours.
You know you're wrong about that. She is my mother.
Your mom? You crazy? Your mom's maggot food.
It's a tragic irony. Susan's refusal to accept the truth about her son ultimately leads to her being put in the impossible position we hinted at in the beginning, choosing between two children on a cliffside. Let's not forget the chilling scene where Henry pushes his sister Connie onto thin ice. It's a sunny winter day, the kind of day that seems perfect for family bonding. But Henry isn't interested in bonding. He's interested in watching something or someone break. As Connie scrambles across the cracking ice, Henry stands back, watching with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. The scene is a perfect metaphor for Henry's character. The thin ice represents the fragile facade of his innocence, while the frozen water below symbolizes the cold, merciless reality of his true nature. When the ice finally gives way beneath Connie, it's not just her physical safety that's shattered, it's the illusion that Henry can be redeemed. It's a terrifying moment, not just because of the potential for death, but because of the casual way Henry orchestrates it. There's no rage, no desperation, just a calm, calculated decision to let his sister drown. It's as if Henry is playing a game, testing how close he can bring someone to death without getting caught. The horror isn't just in the act itself, but in the chilling realization that, for Henry, this is as natural as breathing. Henry shares chilling similarities with iconic characters like Dexter Morgan from Dexter, Anthony Fremont from the Twilight Zone episode It's a Good Life, and Rhoda Penmark from The Bad Seed. All these characters have one thing in common: they cloak their darkness behind seemingly innocent facades. creating a jarring contrast that amplifies the horror. Take Dexter Morgan, for example. He's a grown man with a strict moral code, targeting other killers, but underneath, Dexter and Henry share the same core trait, a disturbingly cold detachment.
In slaughterhouses, they stun the animals before butchering them. It's the humane thing to do. Those animals, they're the lucky ones.
While Dexter channels his urges into something resembling vigilante justice, Henry's motives are simpler, rawer. He kills for the thrill, with no moral framework to justify his actions. Meanwhile, Anthony Fremont from It's a Good Life is another chilling comparison. Anthony, like Henry, is a child who wields power in terrifying ways, manipulating adults and bending reality to his whims.
You're a bad man. You're a very bad man. And you keep thinking bad thoughts about me.
His godlike control over his small town mirrors Henry's complete psychological control over his family, highlighting how unchecked evil can emerge in seemingly harmless forms. Lastly, Rhoda Penmark from The Bad Seed parallels Henry's lack of empathy and inherent cruelty. Rhoda's sociopathy, masked by pigtails and charm, makes her actions even more sinister.
He wouldn't give me the medal like I told him to, that's all. So then he ran away from me and hid on the wharf. But I found him there, and I told him I'd hit him with my shoe if he didn't give me the medal! But he shook his head and said no. So I hit him the first time, then he took off the medal and gave it to me. And then what happened? Tried to run away from me. So I hit him with my shoe again! But he kept on crying and making a noise. And I was afraid somebody would hear him, so I kept on hitting him, Mother! I hit him harder that time, and he fell in the water.
Lastly, Rhoda Penmark from The Bad Seed parallels Henry's lack of empathy and inherent cruelty. Rhoda's sociopathy, masked by pigtails and charm, makes her actions even more sinister. The unnerving realization is that Henry, like Rhoda, could be anyone's child, an unsettling reminder that evil often wears the face of innocence, leaving us questioning the very nature of humanity. And now, we return to the scene that started it all, the cliffside struggle where Susan must decide which child to save. Henry, dangling over the edge with the same cold expression he's worn throughout the film, isn't begging for his life, he's manipulating. He looks into Susan's eyes and coldly states,
Henry!
Mom, I love you! Mom, I need your other hand!
Meanwhile, Mark is also fighting for his life, but his pleas are genuine, filled with desperation and fear. The scene is both visually and emotionally graphic, forcing Susan to make a decision that no parent should ever have to make. It's the ultimate test of her character and the culmination of all the psychological horror that's been building throughout the film.
Henry! Mom!
Susan's decision to save Mark and let Henry fall is both heartbreaking and liberating. It's a final rejection of Henry's manipulative hold over her, a moment of clarity in a fog of denial. The film ends not with a sense of triumph, but with a lingering sense of loss and moral ambiguity. Did Susan make the right choice? Was Henry truly beyond saving? The film leaves these questions unanswered, forcing the audience to grapple with the same moral dilemmas. Throughout The Good Son, the theme of height represents Henry's obsession with power, control, and superiority. Height isn't just a physical space, it's a metaphor for Henry's psychological dominance. It's as if being physically above others reinforces his need to control life itself. Take the treetop scene, for example, where Henry and Mark climb a dangerously high platform. When Henry dangles Mark over the edge, it's not just about the risk of falling, it's a deliberate assertion of power.
Killing wasn't the objective. I just wanted to have the person under my complete control.
In that moment, Henry becomes judge, jury, and potential executioner, enjoying the fear he creates. This use of height extends to the overpass scene, where Henry casually drops a dummy onto the busy freeway below. It's not just an act of random violence, it's a demonstration of his God complex. Watching cars crash from above gives him a bird's eye view of chaos he's caused. The physical elevation reinforces his psychological detachment and coldness, highlighting his manipulative, godlike need to dominate from above, much like a puppet master pulling strings without consequence. Henry's cruelty isn't limited to humans, it extends to animals, which aligns with research on childhood psychopathy. He kills a dog with a crossbow, a classic sign of emerging violent tendencies. According to a study published in Psychiatry Research, animal cruelty in childhood has been linked to later aggressive and violent behavior, serving as an early marker for antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy. The act is more than just a moment of cruelty, it's a clinical red flag. Henry's complete lack of empathy can be explained through neuroscience. Studies show that people with psychopathic tendencies often have reduced activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for emotional responses. They also exhibit dysfunction in the prefrontal cortex, which impairs moral reasoning and impulse control. Essentially, Henry's brain is wired differently, making him less capable of processing empathy, guilt, or remorse, traits essential for normal human interactions.
I think that, well, listen. I've been kept in isolation for 6 months. I've been kept away from the press. I've been buried by you. You've been talking for 6 months. I think it's my turn now. All right?
We got a court order that there won't be any press interviews.
Sure, there won't be any press interviews. You've given them out. I'm gagged. You're not.
Okay. All right.
I'll be heard.
The masks that Mark makes for Henry symbolize this duality. Henry presents as a sweet, angelic child, but underneath is a remorseless predator. The irony of the film's title, The Good Son, becomes glaringly clear.
I think things are going to work out. That's about all I can say.
Mark, the actual good son, is the outsider, while Henry, Susan's biological child, is pure evil. This raises haunting questions about human nature. Are some individuals inherently evil? Is empathy something that can be nurtured, or are some people simply born without it?
Hey, Mark. Don't with me.
As the film suggests, perhaps the darkest monsters don't lurk in shadows. They smile innocently, watching the world burn from above.
Why don't we cut you up into little pieces and feed you to your pooches? And then we'll see how loyal a hungry dog really is. It's not about money. It's about sending a message.
Films and books have long explored the unsettling side of youth, forcing us to grapple with the moral contradictions of depicting evil in the young. This raises a question. Why do some stories about violent children receive harsh ratings like R, while others remain accessible to a broader audience? A closer look at The Hunger Games, Lord of the Flies, and others reveals a fundamental difference in how violence and depravity are portrayed, and more importantly, why. Let's start with The Hunger Games, a PG-13 rated series that's essentially about child-on-child combat in a dystopian world. The violence is brutal. Kids are maimed, impaled, burned, and poisoned, all in front of roaring crowds. In one of the most graphic scenes from the first film, a group of children known as the Careers surrounds a young girl named Rue, shooting arrows into her defenseless body. Katniss Everdeen, the protagonist, cradles Rue as she dies, a moment that is meant to evoke empathy and highlight the horrors of a corrupt society.
A bed of grass, a soft green pillow, lay down.
The violence here is framed as tragic and unjust, with the children acting out of necessity or coercion. Katniss herself is a reluctant warrior, fighting not for glory, but for survival. The explicit message is one of resistance against oppression, softening the impact of the violence by making it a form of self-defense rather than malicious intent. The depiction of violence in Lord of the Flies is another fascinating comparison. In the novel, young boys are stranded on an island and soon abandon their civilized ways. Ralph, the reluctant leader, tries to maintain order, but Jack, his rival, leans into savagery. In one brutal scene, Jack's tribe surrounds Simon in a frenzied ritual, beating him to death in a graphic depiction of mob mentality. "Kill the beast, cut his throat, spill his blood," they chant, their humanity slipping away in the heat of the moment. Yet even here, the violence is portrayed as a loss of innocence born out of fear and primal survival instincts. It's tragic and chaotic, a reflection of the inherent darkness within humanity when societal rules fall away. The boys' savagery is a product of isolation and desperation, making their actions a commentary on human nature rather than individual evil. While The Good Son was rated R for its realistic depiction of a child's sadistic behavior, The Hunger Games and adaptations of Lord of the Flies often receive more lenient ratings despite similar levels of violence. The key difference lies in the framing. The former depicts evil as intrinsic, with Henry as a young psychopath enjoying the chaos he causes. In contrast, The Hunger Games and Lord of the Flies frame their violence within systems of oppression and desperation. The violence is tragic and regrettable, creating a moral buffer that allows viewers to accept it as a necessary evil rather than sheer malevolence. Consider also, we need to talk about Kevin, another R-rated film centered on a child's violent tendencies. Like Henry, Kevin is manipulative and emotionally cold, eventually committing his mother's reflection. I used to think that Kevin was just misbehaving, but then I realized he wasn't pretending. Echoes the same horror that The Good Son taps into, the existence of children who are not misguided but deeply evil. The real terror of The Good Son is not in its violence, but in its implications, that evil can be born into even the most picturesque of families, that innocence is not always a guarantee of goodness, and that sometimes there are no good choices, only the least horrific ones. So back to that original question. If you were Susan, which child would you drop? If this narrative resonated with you, do support us. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe. Thank you for staying with us to the end. See you in the next video on Plaid Chronicles.